I came home late in the evening after work. The door was ajar, and I heard my parents talking in the kitchen. They weren't expecting me. "We've already decided everything," my father was saying. "It's logical. It's time for her to stand on her own feet." "Are you sure?" My mother was doubtful. "She's—" "Enough," my father interrupted irritably. "The girl is 29. She's independent, she has a job, and Max needs a home more. He needs to start a family." I froze in the hallway. My heart started beating faster. I understood what they were talking about. I went into the kitchen, trying to stay calm. "What did you decide?" I asked, folding my arms across my chest. My father and mother exchanged glances. "It's time for you to move," my mother said evenly. "Max is getting married, he needs space, and our house is a logical solution." Max, my brother, the one who was always put above me. "Move? Where?" I asked slowly. "You're an adult, you'll figure it out." My father shrugged nonchalantly. "You'll rent an apartment and live on your own. It's high time you did. Isn't it time for Max to live on his own?" My mother sighed heavily, as if I didn't understand the most basic things. "He's a man, it's more difficult for him," she answered, not looking me in the eye. "He'll have a family. You're a girl, you can handle it." I felt something inside me clench. I was betrayed. I looked at my parents, hoping to see at least a drop of regret. But no. For them, it was a simple, logical decision. They chose him. Again. I didn't say a word. I just turned around and went to my room. The next day, I had to pack my things and leave. Alone. No support. No help. I was kicked out. I stood in my room, looking around for the last time. Once it had been my refuge, a place where I felt safe. Now it had become a place from which I had been pushed out, like an unwanted object. My suitcase was packed. It contained only the bare necessities: clothes, documents, a few personal items. Footsteps were heard outside the door. Max. He walked in without knocking, as if the house was already his. He glanced at me and grinned. "You understand that this is the right decision, right?" he said, leaning against the doorframe. I didn't answer. I simply zipped up my suitcase and looked at him. "You're not angry?" My brother raised an eyebrow in surprise. "Angry?" I grinned bitterly. "No, Max. Just remember this moment." He shrugged, as if my opinion meant nothing. I went out into the hallway, where my parents were already waiting for me. "We did everything for your future," my mother said, but there was no warmth in her voice. "This is your chance to start a new life," my father added. I looked at them. They didn't even feel remorse. "Thank you for your concern," I answered quietly, and I went out the door. It was cold outside. I had no plan, no home, no money, but I had a goal. I would prove them wrong. The first night on the street was the hardest. I didn't sleep. The cold was chilling me to the bone, and my thoughts were racing around in my head like cornered animals. What now? I asked myself over and over again. But in the morning, despite my fatigue, I knew one thing: I wouldn't let myself break down. I started looking for a job. Any kind. First attempts. I went into cafes, shops, and even agreed to work as a cleaner. But without experience and without a permanent address, no one would hire me. First money. I saw an ad for a one-time job, distributing leaflets. The money was ridiculous, but it was enough for food. By the evening, I had my first $10, earned without the help of my family. Looking for a place to live, I found a cheap room in an old house. Small, damp, but it was already my corner. In parallel, I didn't stop studying. I took free online courses, watched lectures. I knew that if I wanted to get out, I needed knowledge. The weeks went by. It was hard. Sometimes I just wanted to burst into tears. But I held on. Every day I repeated to myself, I will not break. I will prove to them that they made a mistake. And meanwhile, my brother. While I worked from morning till night, my brother lived the life of his dreams. Living to the fullest. He bought himself a new car, an expensive SUV, even though he didn't even have a permanent job. He posted photos of expensive restaurants, trips, and noisy parties on social media. How could he afford it? The answer was obvious. With the money he got from selling his house. The same one I was kicked out of. A conversation with my parents. I called my mother. I didn't want to ask how they were, but I was curious if they understood what was going on. "Do you know that he spends all his money?" I asked. "What are you talking about?" She was surprised. "He has the right to live the way he wants. He's a man, he needs to relax." It was like a punch in the face. They knew he was burning through money, but they didn't even try to stop him. My brother was untouchable. Everything he did seemed right. If I spent money the same way, they would call me irresponsible. But he was the son, the heir, the person who was more important by default. That conversation finally convinced me that they would never change. But I knew that sooner or later, reality would hit them harder than any words I could. And I was right. 7 years have passed. 7 long years during which my life has changed beyond recognition. I am no longer who I used to be. I built my career, opened my own business, and now earn more than my parents could ever imagine. I had my own spacious apartment, a car, a stable income, and complete independence. My parents did not care about me all these years. They did not call, did not write. Perhaps they thought that I was living in poverty, or simply did not see the point in keeping in touch, since they had their perfect son. And what about my brother? I did not follow his life, but sometimes I heard from mutual friends that he continued to live for his own pleasure, not caring about the future. One evening, when I was returning home after dinner with partners, my phone rang. It was my mother. I looked at the screen for a few seconds, not believing my eyes. Why is she calling after so many years of silence? I didn't feel joy or excitement, just cold curiosity. I answered. "Hello." A sobbing voice came from the receiver. "Daughter, we need your help." I didn't expect to hear daughter after so many years. They remembered me only when they started having problems. I was silent. Hundreds of thoughts were spinning in my head. Mom was crying. "Please listen to me. It's your brother. He sold the house." I clenched my teeth. "And he spent all the money. We have nothing else. That's it. They kicked me out because their favorite son wanted this house. And now that he squandered it all, they suddenly need a useless daughter?" Mom was sobbing. "We are homeless. We have nowhere to go. We hope that you would help us." "Help!" I heard the fear in her voice. They weren't just asking, they were begging. Their world, which they had so painstakingly built around my brother, had collapsed. I could hang up on them, tell them it was their own fault. But that would be too easy. I wanted them to feel everything I had been through. I took a deep breath and said calmly, "See you tomorrow." I heard the relief in her voice. "Thank you, my daughter." But they had no idea what I had prepared for them. I arrived at the meeting exactly at the appointed time. I had chosen the place on purpose, an expensive restaurant in the city center where they would never be able to afford to go. My parents looked terrible. They were sitting at a table, dressed in shabby clothes with dull eyes. My mother was fiddling with a napkin, and my father looked 10 years older. I showed up in an expensive suit, with a confident posture, as if it were an ordinary business meeting. They looked at me with hope. "Daughter," my mother tried to smile. "Daughter?" I looked at her coldly. "I wonder since when I have been your daughter?" They froze. My father coughed, as if he wanted to smooth things over. "Let's not stir up the past. We are in a difficult situation. We just need a little help. You know, we have always loved you." I grinned. "Loved?" "Let's remember exactly how." I folded my arms across my chest and began. "You kicked me out of the house because he wanted it. You didn't care. You didn't even ask where I would live. And now that he betrayed you, you suddenly remembered me?" They looked down. The mother sobbed. "We were wrong. But you are family." I leaned closer. "No. Then, 7 years ago, I didn't have a family. You made this choice yourself." I watched their hope fade, but I wasn't finished yet. I leaned back in my chair and said slowly, "Where is your son?" My father frowned. My mother looked away. They didn't want to talk about it. I continued. "Shouldn't he take care of you?" It was for him that I stayed on the street. My father exhaled through his teeth. He doesn't answer his calls." I couldn't help but smile sarcastically. "He spent all the money, didn't he?" "Yes." My mother sobbed, hiding her face in her hands. "We don't know where he is. He took everything, sold the house and disappeared." I looked at them, waiting for some kind of comprehension. They sat in front of me, humiliated, crushed by the consequences of their own decisions. You do realize that now you are in the same situation I was in 7 years ago? They were silent. The only difference is that I survived. And you? I shrugged. They swallowed, realizing where the conversation was going. I crossed my arms over my chest and said slowly, "Okay, I can help you, but not for free." They looked up sharply, hope blazing in their eyes. "We'll do whatever you say. Just help us," Mother said quickly. I looked at them with a cold grin. Now they were ready to do anything. Where was this willingness when I begged them not to throw me out? Then first, I leaned forward. "Tell me honestly, do you admit your mistake?" Father frowned. Mother swallowed nervously. "What mistake?" He muttered. "You betrayed me for my brother. You threw me out on the street because he was more important to you. Do you admit it?" Mother began to cry. Father was silent, breathing heavily. "Yes," she finally squeezed out. "We were wrong." I expected these words to bring me satisfaction, but instead I felt only emptiness. "You were wrong," I repeated, "but it doesn't matter now." They froze. "I will help you, but on my terms." "Any terms," my father said immediately. I narrowed my eyes. "Then listen carefully." I slowly looked at my parents, savoring this moment. My whole life they dictated how I should live, but now I set the rules. "You said you would accept any conditions. So listen," I began calmly. "I will give you a roof over your head, but it will be temporary. And no privileges." My mother raised her head sharply, her face red with humiliation. You can't just leave us. We are your parents." "Parents?" I smiled bitterly. "Then where were you when I had nowhere to sleep? When I counted every penny? Where was your concern when you chose my brother and threw me out like trash?" My father turned away, clenching his fists. He knew that I had nothing to say in response. "I will help you only once. You will get an apartment, but you will have to take care of yourselves. Get a job, learn to live without handouts." I spoke clearly without emotion. "And most importantly, never dare interfere in my life again. We are not a family." But, my mother sobbed. "We are old. You should have thought about this earlier." I looked at them with cold determination. "You betrayed me, and now it is your cross to bear." They realize that bargaining is inappropriate. They have nothing more to count on. "This is my last word," I summed up. "You made your choice many years ago. Now reap its consequences." They sat across from me, confused, devastated. Mother was still trying to hold back her tears. Father was looking at the floor gloomily. They realized that their lives would never be the same again. "We lost you," Mother murmured quietly, her voice trembling. "You never had me," I answered coldly. "You wanted a convenient daughter who would silently accept your injustice. But I'm not that girl anymore." They said nothing. It seemed they had finally realized that I would never come back into their lives, that I was not someone they could use. I stood up, taking my bag. "You will have the money for the rent, but I don't want to have anything to do with you anymore." I looked at them one last time. "You didn't give me love. You didn't give me support. Now you get the same in return." Mother wanted to say something, but Father stopped her. He realized that he had lost. I turned and walked away, feeling my breathing get easier with every step. They had lost me, but I was just starting to live. The wind gently swayed the curtains in my spacious apartment. I stood by the panoramic window, holding a cup of coffee in my hands, and watched the bustling city. This world belonged to me now. I was no longer someone who could be ignored, no longer someone who could be thrown out of life like unnecessary trash. I created myself. I remember the past, the night I was kicked out of the house. I was broken, lost, confused. And now I had my own business, independence, self-confidence. The phone vibrated. A message from my mother. I did not read it. I just deleted it, as if it never existed. I no longer lived their life. I was no longer their victim. I smiled at my reflection in the glass. I won. I didn't expect them to come back. I thought my final answer had put them in their place. But the next day they called me. "Please." My mother's voice was muffled, as if she had no strength left. I was silent. "We were wrong," she muttered. "But we didn't think things would turn out like this. We just didn't know what to do. We didn't know what to do." Indignation boiled inside me. Did I know? When I was thrown out, when I worked nights and studied on weekends, did anyone ask if I knew what to do? How can I help? I said in an even voice. We don't have a home anymore, my mother admitted. We've asked relatives, but no one wants to help us. Everyone thinks we deserve it. That's true, I thought, but didn't say it. Your brother is missing, she continued. We don't know where he is, but he left us with nothing. I closed my eyes. I didn't feel sorry for them. Not at all. But something inside told me that the final blow was yet to come. I could save them, flashed through my mind. I could bring them back to the house, give them money, pay off their debts. They would bow their heads, say thank you, but would it change anything? Would they ever admit that I deserved as much as my brother? The question hung in the air. I looked at the phone and understood my next step would determine everything. I stood by the window of my spacious office, holding the phone in my hand. My mother's voice echoed in my head. We were wrong. Okay, I said finally. I'll help. Really? My mother cried with relief. But on my terms. There was silence on the other end of the line. What terms? I turned around, crossed my arms over my chest, and said coldly, First, you will officially admit that you treated me unfairly. And not just me. You will write a letter, where you will tell in detail how you deprived me of my home, gave everything to my brother, told me that I had to cope on my own. How you turned away when I needed support. But why? That's the second condition, I interrupted. You will give me permission to publish it on the internet. What? My mother literally screamed. Your whole life is your reputation, I continued calmly. You were always worried about what people would say. Now let them know the truth. It's humiliating, she exclaimed. No, Mom. Humiliating is to beg for help from a person you betrayed. She fell silent. And one last thing. I paused to give them time to digest what they had heard. I will not give you money. But you said, I will help you find a job, a place to rent, where you can live if you work. But no more gifts. You will teach yourself to survive. My father, who had been silent until then, suddenly exploded. It's blackmail. I grinned. And throwing your own daughter out on the street to please your son isn't blackmail? Silence fell. Oppressive, heavy. You have 2 days, I concluded. If you don't agree, good luck. I hung up and sighed. Will they be able to overcome their pride? Or would they prefer to be left with nothing? I didn't care anymore. I chose myself. A day passed. No call or message from my parents. I didn't wait. I lived my life. Worked. Met with friends. But somewhere deep inside I still caught myself thinking, will they agree? Or will their pride be stronger? The next day, closer to evening, the phone rang. Mom. We agree. Her voice trembled. I felt a cold satisfaction spreading in my chest. Okay. We just need time to write. You have 3 days, I interrupted. Then I'll withdraw my offer. She sobbed, but didn't object. The next day I received a letter. We, Anna and Viktor Petrov, admit that we made a huge mistake. 7 years ago, we kicked our daughter out of the house to please our son. We justified it by saying that a man needs more support, but in reality, we were simply afraid to admit that we were being unfair. We took everything from her without thinking about the consequences. We denied her love and care. And when we ourselves found ourselves in trouble, we came to her, begging for help. We understand that we do not deserve forgiveness, but we still hope that we can somehow correct our mistakes. I reread the letter several times. Did they really write this? I forwarded it to my lawyer. Publish it, he clarified. I thought about it. They wrote this not because they realized their guilt, but because they had no choice. But even that was enough. Yes, I said. Let everyone know the truth. A couple of hours after their confession was published, my brother called me. Did you do this publicly on purpose? He yelled into the phone. I sat back calmly, enjoying his fury. Of course. Did you think I'd let you hush it up quietly? You made us look like idiots in front of everyone we knew. In front of all our relatives. Now people shy away from me like I'm a leper. I chuckled. Oh, how awkward. Do you feel the same way now as I did when I was kicked out of the house? That's different. He squealed. I was your brother. We're supposed to stick together. That's different. I mimicked him. You were my brother, but that didn't stop you from taking my place in the house. He fell silent. My parents don't deserve this, he finally squeezed out. I felt a small shadow of doubt. Really? They made a mistake, but they're your mother and father. And you should be better. I chuckled. Should? I think you've already forced me to think that I owe someone something. Haven't you? He took a deep breath. Just delete the post. Please. I allowed myself a brief pause. No. I hung up. The next morning I was in a cafe, enjoying the silence and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee, when my phone vibrated again. Mom. I slowly put my cup down and stared at the screen for a few seconds, wondering if I should answer. Curiosity got the better of me. Hello. You ruined our lives. Her voice was full of bitterness. I sighed heavily. You ruined it yourself when you chose your only child and betrayed the other. She sobbed. We didn't think it would turn out like this. And I didn't think I'd be left on the street without support. I wonder, Mom, have you ever thought about how I felt? Silence. It's just, you could have helped. I could have. I froze. But I won't. She took a shaky breath. We can't handle it. I know. And she hung up. I looked at the dim screen of my phone, but I felt neither guilt nor regret. Only cold satisfaction. 7 years had passed. 7 years of loneliness, struggle, despair. 7 years when my parents preferred not to notice me, and my brother enjoyed life at my expense. And now, when they had nothing left, they turned to me. But it was too late. A week later, I learned that my parents had settled with some distant relative. My brother had also tried to stay there, but he had been kicked out. He was no longer the pride of the family, but a burden. A neighbor, an old lady named Mrs. Clark, with whom I once worked, told me that my parents had tried to borrow from everyone they knew. No one helped them. A month later, I was sitting in my new office in a prestigious business center when the secretary brought me a letter. From my father. You did it all on your own. We were wrong. We admit it. If you want to talk, we'll be waiting. I read it over several times, but I felt nothing but emptiness. I looked at the letter for a long time. There was no anger inside, but there was no forgiveness either. Did they want to talk? But did they want to talk when they kicked me out of the house? A week later, I decided to meet them. Not for them, but for myself. I made an appointment at a small cafe, but I didn't go there alone. My assistant was with me, as well as security. I was no longer that naive girl who believed in good intentions. When my parents entered, I saw 2 aged, exhausted people in front of me. My brother didn't come. I was no longer interested in his fate. Conversation. We understand that we were wrong, my father said quietly, not looking me in the eye. We were blinded, my mother added. But I didn't see remorse. I saw fear. They were afraid of losing me. They were afraid of being left with nothing. What do you want? I asked coldly. They exchanged glances. Just a chance, the mother muttered. I thought that this was the end. That I would close this chapter of my life and never look back. But life decided otherwise. 3 months had passed since I gave my parents one last chance. They were living in a rented apartment, which I had paid for 6 months in advance, and they had to figure out what to do next on their own. I didn't care about their fate. I didn't answer their calls. I didn't read their messages. And then one day, I was returning from a business meeting when I saw them at the entrance to my office. They were standing on the street, holding some papers in their hands. My father looked exhausted, and my mother looked tired and aged. We don't know who else to turn to, he muttered when I stopped in front of them. They came with a new request. It turned out that the money I left them had run out. My brother had long since disappeared, and now they had no one to rely on. You know we can't cope without you, my mother added. You were always the most responsible. I smiled, not because I was happy to hear it, but because I finally realized they haven't changed. They're just trying to use me again. I've already helped you, I said calmly. And now it's your path. My last sentence. You always said that I could handle it myself. Now try to do it yourself. I turned around and left, never looking back. Final. I closed the door to my office behind me and took a deep breath. Ahead of me was a life that I had built myself. Without their approval, without their control, without their manipulation. This was my world now, and there was no more room in it for those who had betrayed me.